All right, so I'm going to be making a new AAP01 build, and I thought I'd take the opportunity to make a specific trigger change video. There's lots of videos out there that do kind of full breakdowns of the lower receiver, but I kind of want to take the opportunity to make a quick to the point trigger swap video because that's something that a lot of people want to do, and I think that it's one of the best upgrades you can do. So without wasting time, let's get into it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be swapping out this trigger here. This is the stock trigger. To give you an example of what it looks like, all this is loose take up, and then you start getting resistance here, and it creeps a little bit, and it fires. Now compare that to, this is a lower which has the same model of trigger, which we're going to be installing. Compare that to this. No take up, very short pull, and this model also has a set screw at the bottom. It's a little bit hard to see here, black on black. Also has a set screw at the bottom here, this little screw here, which means that you don't waste time going any further back when you pull it than you need to fire the trigger. So the first thing you want to do is you'll want to take the upper off of the AAP01. All you need to do is press the button and you can take it right off. Next, you'll need to take out the two pins in the rear. What we're going to be doing here is we're going to be taking out the hammer group here, and then we'll take out the trigger group later, and the trigger group is where we're going to have the most to do. The hammer group can largely stay intact. We don't need to take apart the small stuff here. In order to take out the hammer group here, you're going to need to take out these two pins in the back, which, as per standard, should be able to pop right out relatively easily. You probably want to get a hex wrench or something that you can use to concentrate your force on it. Both of these pins are just held in by friction, and then you see there's, let's see if focus is here. One side of it is rough. A stock AAP01, the rough side should be on the right side. If someone disassembled it, it could be on the left side. Just make sure that you're not trying to push this rough part that adds the friction all the way through it. Make sure that you're pushing out so the rough part comes out first. And if you're not sure which is which, you can usually look and you should be able to kind of see these serrations there. So once you have those out, the hammer group will actually just pop right out. It may have some friction here from the rear upper disassembly button, if you will. So press that button, then just stick your finger down here under the trigger group here. I'm doing it here, and pull up, and you'll pop right out. Pop it up part of the way. You're gonna see next is, this is the trigger bar. The trigger bar will prevent you, the trigger bar is hitting something there, so it'll prevent you from pulling it out all the way immediately. You're also going to want to watch out because there's going to be a spring down here, which you're going to want to put your finger over to stop it from popping out. Now to take it out the rest of the way, I need to pull the trigger a little bit so the trigger safety comes off. And once that comes up, you see that allows the trigger bar to come up more. And turning it over here and being very careful, it's this little spring that can pop out if you're not careful. So I'm going to just put my finger over that and pull it up and pull it off the trigger bar. If you're doing a full disassembly, you will probably take this apart. I might need to do some stuff, but for a trigger, you don't need to touch this anymore. So that is going over there. So the first thing we'll do is we'll take out the safety here. In order to do that, I like to take the safety, push it in so it's unsafe, and then push it out from this side. You're going to need to push in this little leg here because this little leg is all that's keeping it in. Push that in, and then push, and then pull it out. And you need to angle it up a little bit like this because this is the safety nub, and that might get in the way if you try to push straight. So once you get your safety out, you can go and undo these screws. All right, so once you've taken out your safety and taken out your screws, all that's holding this whole part in is this pin here. This pin is also the axis on which the trigger moves, there, and also the bolt hold open bar here. So it's gonna push this out. I'm gonna hold that in. As you can see, this also, focus is serrated, same as the other pins. Put that to the side. Once you've got that in, you can just go and pull the whole thing out. I usually like to grip it like this, and the whole assembly should come out nicely like this. And then we'll zoom in a bit to make things clear. Here's you have your housing. You also have, this is the safety plate. Trying to make sure it doesn't pop out. And then you have your trigger bar with trigger attached. You will have your trigger spring on it. If I can get this guy off, there you go. Trigger bar and trigger. And then the bolt hold open and the bolt hold open spring there. So you got 2 springs, 2 bars. Relatively simple. It's just a bit of a pain to swap and put it back together, which is why I'm going to show you how. So you got 2 pins in your trigger. One pin is the axis on which the trigger safety moves. The other pin is what keeps it onto the trigger bar. And of course, when we're going to swap the trigger, we need to take that out. So I'm going to do so. On the plastic trigger, it's relatively easy. You can just take it. This is a 1.5 millimeter hex wrench. Anything of similar size that you can use to put some pressure on that to pull it out. Again, this is a friction pin. You can see the serrated surface there. And pull it out the rest of the way. And boom, we have our bar and the trigger, which we will set aside. So I'm going to be installing this, the TTI Airsoft G Series trigger, which I think right now is the best trigger for the AAP01. It's relatively recent and was made with the AAP01 specifically in mind as well. The best part about it is it has a set screw as well. I showed that off earlier in the video. And of course it has the adjustment screw, which is found on every of these adjustable triggers. It costs $650 Taiwan, which is about $20 US, a little bit more, I think. But of course the price of this may vary depending upon where you are. And zooming back in so you can see clearly, this is the trigger out of the packaging. The packaging also comes with a few screws and a pin. This long screw is used for other guns. We only need the short ones for the AAP01, so we're going to set that aside. Now just like the stock trigger, it attaches to the trigger bar by a pin which goes through here. If I can find the hole there you go. So you just need to put your trigger bar down in there and then make sure you can see the hole there, and we're going to put the pin in there. So making sure that your trigger bar is oriented correctly, all the spiky bits here should be pointed upwards, and the trigger, of course, should be the right direction. Just going to take this and put the pin in the hole here. I always like to have the serrated part of the pin, the rough part, if you will, on the right side, just for consistency. We got that. Now, once you have that in, the difficulty here is pin's probably either steel or aluminum, probably steel. The trigger is aluminum. It's a little bit rough. You need to probably take a hammer or something in order to get this in properly. So once it's in like this, you're mostly okay. You just need to kind of hammer this part in to make sure it stays secure. And that went in quite nicely. You don't want to overdo it. And then for the TTI trigger, at least, it's in a little recessed area. You can't just take a hammer and wail on it. It won't quite work. You need to get something like this, something like if you got a cheapo hex wrench that works or something of the sort, just to make sure the force law goes in that. And just give it a couple whacks. And now the trigger is on a trigger bar nicely. Before I put it in, however, there's a little trick. This is specific to the TTI trigger. The TTI trigger, as we've noted, has a set screw. The set screw, once you put it in the gun, or once you put the trigger in the gun, the set screw is a little bit of a pain in the butt to move because you can only move a couple of turns each time. So I'm actually going to put the set screw in beforehand because you need to put it through the front here. So now we've got the hardest part of the reassembly, which is getting this, putting all these things back into it, and then getting it back in the frame. It's only a few parts, so you'd think it wouldn't be that hard, but because you got a couple springs here and they're always threatening to pop out, it can be a little bit difficult. So here in this part of the frame here, there's a little notch up here. And you're gonna wanna go and take this part of the bolt hold open spring and slide that into that notch. What I like to do is I like to slide that into that notch and then tension this with my fingers, and between that notch and the tension here, just stay in. Then you take your bolt hold open, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to put the bolt hold open in here, and then the other side of the spring is going to hold on this protrusion here. So slide that in, and then I've already got my finger on the spring there, and I can just pop it up. You see now it's sitting on that protrusion. Now, you don't have to do this, but I kind of like to do it. I like to go and I like to take my pin here and insert it here part way, just to keep things in place and reduce the chance of everything popping out and going all over the place. Now we want to flip this over, and this trigger here is going to slide into here. We're going to back the pin out a little bit, and this trigger is going to slide into here. You see this place where the trigger is lowered down a bit? We need to kind of fit that into here around the bolt hold open bar, and the spring there. And once you got that in, I'm going to move this around as needed and get the pin all the way in. You gotta wiggle a little bit. So putting the pin in there is really just to keep everything in place and make it easier for you as you're assembling this. If you're trying to hold all this in with your fingers, it can get real difficult to have it not all pop out. So the last thing we're gonna do here is we're going to put the trigger spring from the trigger bar to the frame here. So you want to take your spring and then have the spring sitting so that the end coil ring there is on the bottom, and slide it onto the trigger bar. And the other side of it, just gotta pull forward a little bit so it gets on that little nub. And this little nub will be fitting as the frame, so it's not gonna slip off once it's installed. And it should all be like this. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this and I'm gonna put it in the frame. What you gotta do is you gotta put your trigger, make sure your trigger goes in first, and put it into one like this. Now, of course, I put in the pin to stabilize it before. That's gonna be it's gonna be in there, and that's gonna get in the way. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this down, and I'm gonna pull the pin out and push down, and everything just slide into place, no problem. I really like having the pin there because it makes the whole thing much easier. Now I'm gonna put it around, and again, the serrated part of the pin, put on the right side. Before it didn't matter, so I just had it on the left. And probably going to need to wiggle things around a bit to make sure the pin is able to go through. Then once it's in, and you push it the rest of the way home, like that. Now we've got our trigger assembly in there. Next, we just need to put our screws back in and our safety back on, which I will do right now. So now with the screws in, we'll put our safety in. It's usually easier to come in from the right side with the red, aka fire part of the safety, and put it in that way. Push it in, and then push down a little bit, and that should work freely. So it's worth noting that with an adjustable trigger, and once you have it adjusted down to be a hair trigger like this, your safety, your push button safety here will not function. Depending upon the model, it either will not work, or you won't even be able to push it in and out, or even worse, actually, you might be able to push it, but pushing it will actually cause the gun to fire. So be aware of that. You are going to sacrifice your push button safety in order to have a really nice light trigger. So with everything assembled and back in the frame, we need to go and next put our hammer group back. So we're gonna grab our hammer group, again, being careful of this spring here. This spring right here, we're gonna put our finger over this, hold like this, so my middle finger on it. And then what we're aiming to do here is we're aiming to get this trigger bar here. We wanna make sure that it is up as far as possible because we put our set screw in, and depending upon the shape of the trigger, it may not go up as far as the stock trigger. So we need to make sure that this goes in the middle here. And you may need to kind of twist it around, you see, like this, in order to make sure you get that in and get in the frame. Boom, boom. But then, once you've got it in, like so, just need to push it down into place. I need to push this button in to push the last little bit in place. Now everything's back in place. Now as you're doing that, like I said, you need to keep the trigger bar and make sure it slots into the right place here. You also may need to twist this part of it to get it around here. You may need to pull this up a little bit and do some twisting to get it in, but you should be able to put it in without major problems. And then put in our final pins. There. And then just do a basic function check. With your fingers, you need to pull the hammer back and then press as reset and make sure it works. As long as there's no problems, it should. But of course, what's an adjustable trigger? If you don't adjust it, you can see here, it's sitting far forward compared to this one, which has been adjusted, which is all the way back. So let's go and show how to do that adjustment basically. what it comes down to is, in order to adjust it, what you're doing here is you are taking the grub screw that comes with it and you're putting it into this little screw slot here. And all that does is it pushes against the trigger bar there and impacts by how deep you have it screwed in. It impacts how far basically the trigger will sit. So if you have it sitting out all the way over here, it's going to be pressing against that trigger bar, and it's going to be already sitting like here, and you get a very short pull. So let's go and add that guy in. So I'm going to take my bent little hex wrench here. I'm going to not add Loctite to this right now. You probably will want to eventually add Loctite, but for demonstration purposes, I'll do it without, so it's cleaner. Know that later on you're probably going to want to add some Loctite or thread locker of some kind. Now, as you're doing this, be careful. This should not be hard to put in. If you're having a really hard time getting a lot of resistance, it's probably cross-threading there. It's very easy to cross-thread these. In fact, the TTI one, it varies from company to company. The TTI one is actually on, if anything, on a little bit on the loose side, which is why you definitely need thread locker in the end. But for demonstration, I'm not going to do this. So I put this in, and right now we have it so that it's sitting outside of the trigger a little bit. We'll see if that gives us enough room. Nope. So you see, if it's too far forward, it's already going to be sitting, and the trigger bar will be pressing against the trigger sear. So the moment you press this disconnect, it's going to fire, which means we need to screw it in a bit more. Screw it in to be mostly flush with the trigger, I think. Hopefully you can see relatively well enough. I think it's a little bit more. Let's try that. Hasn't fired. Very nice. Very good. And then finally, put on your upper receiver and make sure that it functions there as well. And there you go. That is the quick and easy way to swap out an adjustable trigger into your AAP01, which I think is really the best upgrade you can do.